Welcome back. The former head of the British Army, Lord Dannatt, joins me now. Lord Dannatt, great to have your insights this morning as to what has gone on overnight. What's your impression, Lord Dannatt? Have these strikes been successful in completely wiping out Iran's nuclear capabilities? What do we know so far?
Well, of course, we don't know as much as we would like to know. Donald Trump has said quite categorically that he has obliterated Iran's nuclear capability. The Iranians are saying, well, not quite so. The truth will lie somewhere between those two positions. But I think the absolute reality is that the Americans have been planning for quite some time alongside the Israelis to make this strike. Donald Trump said, 2 or 3 days ago, he was going to make his mind up in the next fortnight. That was giving him a little bit of time, I think, time to move his assets into place, move probably other US citizens, diplomats out of harm's way, and then has struck with surprising speed, but I think has struck decisively. And confining the attacks, I think quite reasonably, many people would agree, to those nuclear sites with the massive ordnance projectiles, the MOP bombs that we've been talking about, the penetrator bombs that he always planned to use and have hit significant number of targets. Now, whether this was the right thing to do or not, I think history will debate for quite some time. But Prime Minister Netanyahu is in no doubt this was the right thing. The way he was eulogizing Donald Trump overnight was easily scripted. But I think there is a fair degree of justification, whatever others might think, that Iran is a rogue regime. It has been threatening Israel. It's been threatening other neighbors. It's had its strength written down through the attacks on Hezbollah and Hamas recent times. The Syrian regime has changed. So I think Netanyahu found this was the moment to strike, and Donald Trump decided that this was the moment to back him up and deal with this problem for once and all.
And what next, Lord Dannatt? Because, of course, talk is turning to regime change. We had that quite extraordinary Truth Social post last week by Donald Trump saying that he wasn't minded to take out the Ayatollah yet. We have had this decapitation strike, Mossad agents inside Tehran taking out those 3 military leaders, replacing one of the leaders who was again taken out. Is this about wiping out Iran's nuclear threat or something much, much more significant in your mind?
Well, you're absolutely right. There are 2 elements to it. One, unquestionably, is reducing, eradicating Iran as a nuclear threat. The other is the issue of regime change. Now, I think the issue of regime change is a completely different matter, and I don't think Donald Trump has gone about this in the right way. When he was calling for the people to rise up, I think that will probably have had the directly opposite effect. I think it will have promoted a rally around the flag feeling amongst many, most, perhaps all, well, not all, but a large majority of Iranians. Yes, the regime is not as strong as it would like to think it was. There has been opposition. The opposition isn't particularly effectively led, but I think being told by an outside world leader to rise up is not the way to do it. It may be that over time, the Iranian people will think, my goodness, this regime that's been leading us has got us into a pretty pickle here. Our nuclear capability, which they told us was the key to our safety and security, has been destroyed. And it may be that over time, in the medium to long term, a regime change might come about in Iran. But I don't see it Donald Trump inspired in the very short term.
What's your analysis of the Prime Minister's rhetoric here, not just today in this statement that he issued at 7:30 this morning, but also this week? It was only on Thursday that the PM was warning Trump not to, quote, ramp up attacks. He also posted on X this notion that Donald Trump wasn't going to do this. And now, of course, he has, Lord Dannatt. I've just spoken to Michael Portillo, the former Defence Secretary, who thinks the Prime Minister's being, well, a little lacklustre in his support of the US.
Well, I think he's put himself between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, he is very keen to have good relations with Donald Trump. We've seen a lot of effort being put into trade deals and putting the UK into an apparently more favourable position than some of our former EU partners. On the other hand, he clearly doesn't believe that the use of force that the Americans have just demonstrated is the right thing to do. So along with other European leaders, has been calling for restraint and calling for a return to negotiations. Well, I'm afraid the world has moved on rather rapidly. I don't think negotiations in any meaningful form are very likely because the effect of these massive ordnance penetrators has effectively taken the major bargaining chip that Iran had off the table. And I think Iran, if it comes to any form of negotiation, is negotiating for scraps. So the Prime Minister, in a sense, between a rock and a hard place, may have somewhat backed the wrong horse on this one.
Yeah, it doesn't look as if negotiation or indeed diplomacy is top of the agenda for those in Tehran right now. In general, what's your analysis of Trump's handling of this? You mentioned earlier, Lord Dannett, the timing. On one hand, he suggests it could be in 2 weeks' time. Then he goes last night. Element of surprise there?
Well, I think tactically there is an element of surprise there, but I think your question is a broader question, going right back to all that Trump was saying during the presidential election campaign. He wanted to be the president that stopped wars and not started one. No, he didn't start this one, but he certainly weighed into it big time. So he is going very strongly against a major plank of the platform on which he stood, from which he spoke. And I think many people in the United States will say, come on, I didn't vote for this. I voted for the president who was going to stop wars. I voted for the president that was going to fix the Rust Belt. I fixed the president who's going to make America great again. My goodness, now we're spending squillions of dollars overseas joining somebody else's war. So he, on the one hand, you can argue doing the right thing internationally by finishing off and eradicating probably Iran's nuclear capability, has knocked a big dent in his own popularity at home. It'll be interesting to see how he can square that circle. In a sense, he's put himself between a rock and a hard place domestically.
Yeah, I don't think the MAGAs have an appetite to fight another foreign war. What happens now? What will your successor in charge of the military be doing now, Lord Dannett? What conversations will be taking place with regard to the UK's role in this, if it has any?
Well, of course, that's a matter for the Prime Minister and the British government to decide whether we want to take an active role. My own instinct is that we will decide not to do that. So the military focus for now for the UK is to make sure that our force protection measures for those of our citizens and our service personnel in the wider region are as good as they can be. In particular, we've got the sovereign bases in Cyprus, RAF Akrotiri, now had extra aircraft flown there. And I believe the capability is such that we can fly patrols constantly to make sure that that base does not itself come under attack. And then, of course, not so very far away, but heading towards the Indo-Pacific, is the British-led Carrier Strike Group. That is some kind of target as well. So we need to make sure those force protection measures are good. And then, of course, there is the question of a large number of British citizens in the wider region, not the least of which is a very large number who got rather marooned in Israel. So the government will have to be thinking about non-combat evacuation operations, which themselves are important, but they're difficult and they consume a lot of resources. So I don't think we'll join in an offensive way, but we've got a lot of work to do to make sure British interests, British people are secure in that region.
Well, we may not intervene if the Prime Minister listens to his bestie, Lord Hermer, who believes that if we do play a role against Iran, it could violate international law. What's your response to that, Lord Dannett?
Well, of course, this is the great debating point as to whether what the Israelis have done. Now, they would argue that they're acting in self-defense, but the Americans joining in. Now, you can't make a very strong case that the Americans are defending themselves. But so there is this debate as to whether they have got very close to the line between what is legal internationally and whether they've crossed that line. I think they will argue that Iran posed a wider threat, not just in the Middle East, but in a much wider area as well. And therefore, there was an element of preemption for in the interest of wider security and the interests of other nations, that the United States had joined with Israel, not just to protect Israel, but to protect other countries and other people in that wider region. That's what they will argue. But it's going to be an argument that goes on for quite some time. And lawyers like Lord Hermer will, yes, they'll express their point of view for quite some time to come.
Yeah, it might be more difficult for him to argue that point of view if, for instance, Tehran does retaliate at UK military bases.
Indeed. Then, of course, there's the argument as to who sort of shot first, as it were. But if there was to be an attack on a UK base, well, then that does change the paradigm as far as the UK is concerned. But in answer to your earlier question, I think the UK focus will be on force protection and the protection of our people and our interests, rather than proactively joining in this offensive operation.
Lord Dannatt, thank you very much indeed, as ever, for your wisdom and experience this morning. Great to speak to you. We've got a few breaking news lines now. We've heard from Iran's Revolutionary Guard in the last few minutes. They have said that they won't be intimidated by noise made by Donald Trump, describing the White House and Tel Aviv as criminal gangs. They have also said that these responses will bring regret. Tehran has warned the Western world that any move to target the supreme leader, the Ayatollah, would result in shutting the door to any negotiations, saying it would prompt an unlimited response.